Hey, I'm Cedric Chambers, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the 3D Podcast, a masterclass where we share with you everything you need to know about how to transform diversity and inclusion in your organization as well as in your community. We're on a mission to amplify the voices of leaders that are making an impact in the world today so that we can have a better tomorrow. Our goal every episode is to keep it simple, honest, and transparent with you by uncovering the truths in diversity and inclusion with the hope of creating behavioral change, all while presenting it from a unique perspective. So look, if you're ready, get your notepad out, pour you a drink, and let's dive deep as we discuss the dimensions of diversity. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 3D Podcast, where we speak to real practitioners that are making real change in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. I'm excited for our show today as we are speaking to none other than Kristin Malek. Kristin serves as the Director of Business Diversity at CDW. In this capacity, Kristin is responsible for CDW's $2+ billion annual supply diversity spend initiatives and is the architect of CDW's diverse supply chain, which today is defined as more than 1,100 plus suppliers that serve the needs and offer solutions to CDW and their customers. Outside of CDW, Kristin is a member of the National Minority Supply Diversity Council, as well as a board member of several organizations, a few of those being Women's Business Enterprise, National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, and TechScale. Kristin serves as an executive board member to a non-for-profit SheTech in New York City, focusing on women and young girls participating in STEM. Under Kristin's leadership in 2020, CDW was inducted into the prestigious $1 Billion Roundtable. And in 2021, Kristin was named one of the top 25 women in power impacting diversity by Diversity Professional Editorial. And finally, Kristin has been named one of New York City's Responsible 100 for her work in diversity and inclusion in New York City. I hope y'all see that Kristin is a rock star. So without further ado, let's jump into the discussion as we dive deep with Kristin Malek. So Kristin, how are you doing today?
I am so good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Look, I'm excited about having you on the show today. I can't wait to get into the topic and the discussion. But first, before we get into that, I would love for our viewers and our listeners just to get to know a little bit more about you. And I would love it if you could just take us through kind of your background and your journey as you navigate through your career and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I so appreciate the time today. I just really want to make sure that I thank you for creating opportunities for people to listen, because it is when we listen, we can learn. And there's so much learning to be had and so many problems to be solved. And when we can learn in safe environments and consume at a pace that works for us, I think we can get a lot done together. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm particularly glad, to be here today. We're going to talk through supplier diversity. We're going to talk about economic recovery. We'll talk about, hardship, but really land on a promise of progress. And so if I reflect on, progress and what perhaps the journey was for me to sit here today, humbly with you and with an authentic, grateful heart. I would tell you that, prior to my work at CDW, I worked at another Fortune 500 organization for 20 years.
Okay.
And such legacy, right? You hear 20 years.
Yeah.
And most people, what I assume or what I've been told is, then why did you leave after 20 years? And so I loved the organization in which I was at. I grew up there right when I was 16. I was that kid when I was 16 that had to have 3 jobs in order to either have gas money or if I wanted to go to college. So I worked at our local Six Flags, the Giant Drop. I was like the ride operator. Thumbs up.
Awesome.
Everyone was at our other Fortune 500 organization. And then I waitressed as well at a local pancake restaurant here too. So I've always loved the hustle and I've always loved to make money because for me, money was an enabler. It's how I was able to do things, get things, of course, how I was able to have higher education. And so if I think back when I was 16 and I had these 3 jobs, and then the one that I actually stayed at for 20 years, right, from the moment I was 16, the internships, all of the roles, the relocations. I did work in Canada on international assignments, which I really, really enjoyed. I probably would still be there today if I'm being really transparent because I really loved the organization so much. 12 years ago, I became a mom to my daughter, Caitlin.
Awesome.
And at 28, so excited to start a family. And on the day Caitlin was born, a nurse had said to me, "You have a baby girl and she has Down syndrome."
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
there I was, right at
Yeah.
28,
Yeah.
in such almost conflict. And I think it's okay to say that my first reaction wasn't really celebratory. I was pretty
Yeah.
scared. I was pretty worried. Every book I read kind of didn't prepare me for that or
Yeah.
this journey of motherhood. And I was trying to recall somebody with Down syndrome that I knew because I hadn't yet met Caitlin. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to think of, I'm like, I don't know if I know anybody with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
And so all of that flood of emotion, and I'm so grateful for all the therapists that I've had, all of the community groups, all of the mentors that have helped me through that. But in that moment and the months after, my obsession being attached to the sales number at the organization that I loved really began to minimize. I loved it
Yeah.
so much. I often tell this story that I loved EBITDA. Like I loved that number.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted my
Yeah.
license plate to say it. I mean, I was it. I was like, how do we make money? How do we make it grow?
Yep.
You
Yep.
gotta hit your number.
Yeah.
And I was obsessed with EBITDA and obsessed with winning. And then Caitlin really changed everything for me because as I shopped and dined and went out into the community, I really did not see anybody that looked like Caitlin or my
Yeah.
family. I was wondering, where is the Down syndrome community? Do
Mm-hmm.
they work? Do they go to school? I mean, that's how naive I was pushing the stroller. And
Yeah.
I just, right, panic sets in. And so the shift of being obsessed with EBITDA that I had grown to love and appreciate for 20 years in that journey minimized. And then I became quite swiftly obsessed with understanding marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And, the fire in my heart for sure comes with the disability community because that's my family.
Yeah.
But when you begin to put good intelligence around it and study it as much as I have, the marginalization is so much bigger than all of us, right? We are still talking about women's issues, race issues. We're talking about so many issues, and 2020 really imploded so much of that. And so, my focus wasn't ever just the disability community. It was, how do I have a career and do meaningful work and contribute in a meaningful way that still serves my family so that I can ensure I'm doing the best I can to contribute for Caitlin, but
Yeah.
also continue to fill and nourish my soul to do work that, that would string success together, string impacting change together,
Yeah.
and, sustainable efforts. And so I began
Yeah.
a career in supplier diversity, and that's where I am today.
No, this is, I would say that I understand kind of a little bit of where you were, right? Because I've seen many parents go through that initial phase. My wife's is a board certified behavior analyst, and she's been doing this probably for the last 12 to 15 years,
Yeah.
heavily with Down syndrome, children autism. And because of that, I've been in it too, as well. And so as you see people go through that, change, right? It opens up the eyes to really understand, like, who is this community? What are their, what are the things that the support groups, the areas that, we can really dig into to help. And you find out that, this is me just being on the other side, is that, you find out that regardless of, the actual situation, whether it be Down syndrome or autism, look, the children are smart. Like they're able to go out and do amazing things, right? And so it's an understanding of, like, they're still, like us, right? They may have some other, elements, which we all do in some way, shape, or form, right? But they're still able to go out and do amazing things. And I think just being around that community with my wife has, like, allowed me to see
Yeah.
just that regardless of what happens, or, whether it's whatever the element is, people can still go out and do amazing things. So it's humbling to hear your story going through that.
Oh, Thanks. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you to your wife and her work and her team, because we really do need professionals. We need the next generation to want to get into that field of work. We need helpers. We need
Yeah.
leaders. Some people often ask me, what generation kind of worries you? Or they ask me, what worries you most about Caitlin? And it's always the big three, I think, right? It's healthcare, it's education, employment,
Yep.
right? She doesn't
Yep.
have the same access to healthcare as perhaps you and I. Education, right, is always filled with IEP meetings and accommodations, and I'm
Yeah.
still looking for a college that might, accept her in the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. But employment, right? I don't know, right, if anyone listening can reflect on when's the last time you saw somebody with a disability working and thriving in a meaningful
Yeah.
job, right? Such a gap. But that's the journey we're all on. We have to put people back to work. And
Mm-hmm.
I know we're gonna dig into it, but to answer my question that I led with, what worries me the most is her current peer generation. When
Yeah.
they say, what worries you most? And I say, it's her generation today, it's her peer group today, because they will be her hiring managers,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? They will be the ones across the table when she's interviewing to have a job and seek employment. They'll be the ones. And so we have to have inclusion now in seventh grade, fourth grade, right? And make sure that they're part of the community, throughout, not just when we're tackling the big three of employment, education. It is her peer group. But we need people like your wife and family to know that we need to assume potential,
Yeah.
right?
No,
And I think
I'm
that that
definitely there.
can that can level all of us, and not even just with Down syndrome or disability, but if we can assume potential and take that humility part of us, is that everybody builds on their own, intelligence in their own way, in their own brain.
Yeah.
So I'm a soar with your strength kind of a girl.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. And so let me ask you this. As so, going through your career, navigating just life and everything together, as you've grown and as you've gone to different roles and different things, like what would you say are kind of the one or two like biggest things that you feel like, whether it was this, the situation with your daughter and just continuing to learn and grow through that, or whether it was like how you approach work, like what was one or two things you think are very helpful for you as you navigated through your career?
I love this question. I will work really hard to stay on topic. I know you'll navigate me.
We good. We'll make it
If
work.
I don't, if I don't, I think when you ask that, some things flood to my mind of, I raise my kids and I lead my team with the kind of mantra of, you can either be present or you can participate, right? There's really just
Love
two
it.
ways to live life. You're either
Mm-hmm.
present or participating. And every day I'm going to participate. I will find a way to participate. And I encourage my two daughters, I encourage my team, like, just participate, right?
Yeah.
It's not enough, I think, just to show up, but find a way to participate. It doesn't have to be big, right? You don't have to maybe sit on a podcast or launch your own, such as
Yeah.
yourself, or but there are ways to participate that still can compound lasting change. And
Yeah.
so I think change is best done when it's ripple by ripple by ripple. I'll tell you this though, of to also answer your question of
Mm-hmm.
how I've navigated my career. I there's no secret, and I think I led with it. I think money matters a lot, right?
Yeah.
Money keeps doors open. Money helps us, have housing. It helps us give
Yeah.
back. Money, my salary and the money I make can ensure I can send my daughters to school. Take that away, I don't know how that would be possible, because it
Yeah.
costs money to do those things and have access to healthcare. So money matters. So I was a little bit drawn to entrepreneurship early on, of like, okay, right, I'm reading all those books on entrepreneurship. How do you make a million? How do you do all these things? And felt myself gravitating that way. But what I don't think we teach enough of is public entrepreneurship. There are
Mm.
so many public problems to solve for, that we need community help. We need next generation leaders. We need leaders like you and myself. But
Yeah.
public entrepreneurship, I think, is something that probably isn't talked about enough. I think public entrepreneurship can probably really help us with our economic recovery today. And so when I was leaning to what am I going to do, next, because I knew I couldn't, chase EBITDA, and I didn't want the license plate anymore. Not like, am I going to start a business? Am I going to write a book for the disability community? Like, I'm going to write new legislation for new moms who have a baby with, like, all these thoughts, right? And the best thing I could think of, what are the problems I need to solve? And if it's going back to employment, if it's going back to access to healthcare, and education, those are public problems to solve. And so I feel like my role is really public entrepreneurship.
No, I love it. I love it. We're getting into supply diversity today, and as we dive into that topic, I mean, a lot of the folks on the other end are entrepreneurs, right? Most, right, if not all, right, and the struggles that they go through. We're going to talk more about that. I mean, but it's having folks that are helping and helping folks grow and develop and learn, as they navigate through that journey is much needed in the industry and in the space that we're in. And so, let me ask you this. So right now you're with CDW, and you're leading the business diversity. And so my question is for you, when you think about CDW, kind of just to kick things off here, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, kind of take us through, like, how does CDW look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and kind of what are some of those things that you all are working on as y'all are going down your own journey?
Yeah, I have been on the CDW team for about 4 years. And I'll tell you this, not another bumper sticker, but I feel like I fall in love with CDW just about every other day.
Yeah.
Because we're innovating, we're so customer centric. Like, we just follow the customer to the core. And I think when the why is clear, the how is always present. And
I love
so I think we don't overcomplicate things, which I really love at CDW. And the same for DEI and business diversity. Prior to September, the program that I lead at CDW was supplier diversity, right? Which is probably really well known. In our landscape, there's supplier diversity disciplines and certificates. And, our CEO, Chris Leahy, is, very much dialed into this program, and I have great support from the top. She said, I think we need to change it to business diversity, because all that we will hold ourselves accountable for moving forward is bigger than helping a supplier.
Yeah.
It's that stakeholder capitalism, right? We can't just focus on, for us, our program anchors on, we can't just focus on the supply base. It's that whole, for us, clean tech. So where are we sourcing from? Where are you procuring from? How do they do business? What does their workforce look like? What are their labor practices? What is their community giving? What is their governance? And so when we looked at it like that, it really just became, business diversity. And so that probably speaks a little bit to, where our journey at CDW. It's one that I get asked a lot too. Have you had a pivot since 2020, right? In an economic downturn and, all of the civil unrest. And quite frankly, the answer was not a lot of pivoting in business diversity. We've been practicing, equitable supply chains for 15 years. And so just the way that it's always been. Now, did we absolutely have to, create more developmental programs for the supply chain? Absolutely. And so, to further answer your question, our journey is to not just ever, chase a spend number or have it be about, how many dollars can we directly spend with MWBEs and not know what it's contributing to. Right? I feel sometimes in this space, we can really go after and target a spend number when I feel the best success can be around the multiplier effect. Right? So there's no doubt, right? We said money matters, and CDW is spending, of the billions directly to minority and women-owned suppliers every year.
Yeah.
But then what? What is that money actually doing? Who is it helping? Were jobs actually created when we were helping our suppliers grow? Were they able to open new locations, scale? Were they able to enhance their capacity? Those are the questions that I have to answer to. It's not a spend number or a spend target. It's what is the multiplier effect? And so that's the journey CDW has been on, continues to be on. My CEO, once said to me, let's get 5% job growth in all our communities, right? So I was actually, given a job growth goal. What a phenomenal goal to get.
Yeah, it is.
To be responsible to architect solutions that can create meaningful jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for business diversity. And it's not separate at CDW. The way in which our diversity, equity, inclusion for our coworkers, our community, our partners, and our suppliers is really, centric on how do we do good? How do we
Mm-hmm.
listen? How do we learn? And teach along the way. And so I'm really proud of CDW's journey. We're learning all the time. We're leading. We're being actionable with really applied focus. And I'll tell you this one thing too: we aren't about having intent statements over impact. We just about
Mm-hmm.
will measure everything and measure everything, not to ring a bell for everything we do good, but measure to
Yep.
make sure that the focus is where it needs to be. And if not, we can make a change.
I look, I love, and you know, I love the why in the house statement. But even on top of that, when you think about the last year and a half, almost, 2 years at this moment, there's been a lot of shifts and changes, right? Especially when you talk about minority owned businesses and just the number that, went down and failed during
Mhm.
the pandemic, right? And when you think about the number, I know I saw some numbers that was like upwards of 40%, especially when it came to black owned businesses. But when you kind of look before that and really dove into the numbers a little bit, you were seeing that I think it was roughly about 2.6, 2.7 million black businesses. And then they had it around like 2.6 were just one person with an average of, $55,000 in revenue. And when I was listening to those numbers and I was thinking about it, whether they were exact or not, I could see it. But when I was, thinking about those numbers, the question then becomes, what assistance are they getting? Right? Because it's one thing to make money. It's another thing to then know how to apply to your business and use it so that you can continue to grow the business and continue to be a, whether it's a supplier to the company that you're working with, or even just get bigger contracts, right? Because in some cases, right, you can't get bigger contracts if you don't understand the mechanism that's needed to grow the business overall, right? And so when we think about, what's happening today, are you doing anything kind of directly with entrepreneurs that are helping them, grow? And I would say this, I spent, almost 10 years in corporate right before this. And the company I was with, large multinational, one thing they did that I thought was amazing was that they would invite suppliers and customers into leadership training. And they would do that because ultimately, at the end of the day, if my customers are running their business good, they're continuing to buy product from us, we're continuing to thrive. And if our suppliers, those large tier ones and some of the smaller ones are running and operating, at a more efficient way, we can then cut our costs right, and we can figure out right how to make more better deals, better overall outcomes for both parties involved. So when it comes to just a business, are you doing anything specific that's helping entrepreneurs kind of navigate through that space?
We are, and you're absolutely right with your research. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York published that study. Between February and April of 2020, the pandemic contributed to a closure of 41% of Black-owned
That's a
businesses,
lot. That's a lot.
32 for Latino-owned, 26
Mm,
Asian, 17 for white-owned.
yeah.
Disparity is in the data, and right, we talked about learning. We learn from people and data. Unless
Mm-hmm.
somebody else has a third, I'm not sure where else, but you can learn from people and data, right? Those
Yeah.
are the experiences that create this. And so, that impact, can't be lost on anyone. But I also agree with you, and I will answer your question. We certainly can't be of the mindset or a race to spend our way to justice,
Yeah.
right? And all of a sudden just move, spend, and start procuring here and start doing this. I saw a lot of that rapid shift in 2020. And I think the same with some of the gaps in our workforce. We're not going to hire our way to justice. We're not going to spend our way to justice, right? That's not the call to action today, but the call is, to link arms and develop, solutions going forward. So yeah, more than ensure that our suppliers are making money, are participating in contracts and opportunities with CDW, we have to develop and give them resources, right?
Yeah.
CDW, right? Not small, not disadvantaged. right?
Yep.
So there is a responsibility and an accountability we have to the supply chain, right? Yeah. And so we have coaching programs throughout the organization. But then, really exciting on the brink of it, this week we're launching our mentorship protege program in New York
Nice.
City. And, that's going to be such rich content in which we've invited our mentees, right, that have been named to the program. They're going to go through a series of curriculum from financial overview, organizational help, RFP, negotiating, contractual support or training. And then, one of the topics is of their choice, right? We'll survey them and see what do they need. And so it is that balance of, the diverse suppliers, the 41% of closures that we saw, those companies, some are of the belief I read and heard that they don't need mentors, they need customers, right? And so I think it's both.
You need
I
both.
think
Yes, you do.
it's both.
Yes, you
So
do.
they can be a great customer, to CDW and help us serve our customers and all that we do. But we absolutely, if they're going to be in our supply chain to be value added, we have to teach and coach along the way. So we have coaching programs, throughout all of our locations, mentorship protege programs, launching. We QBR with so many of them, and I had the opportunity to start traveling in August of this year. And my first trip was to New York, and I got in 10 supplier visits in 3 days. I was just so excited to meet them. So it's really a hands-on approach. That's really, I think, what I love about our program is it's about relationships. Really, I sometimes even hesitate to call it a program because we have such great relationships with the supply chain. When I talk internally at CDW, when I'm invited to team meetings or sales meetings, and I tell them that, our spend in 2020 with diverse suppliers was at an organizational high, right? We didn't take a waiver or we didn't take a pass and say, gosh, the supply chain constraint is too hard. The margins are too great. We're not going to share.
Yep.
There was such high IT consumption across public private sector. But the sales team at CDW utilized our supply chain like never before in 2020. So that signals two things. I'm always looking for demand signals.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that signals to me is one, the supply chain was ready for the so we have coached and mentored, appropriately. And then two, is that they showed up when we needed them. And that's because of the relationships. That just doesn't happen, I believe, out of, coincidence or out of a tryout or some social experiment. Right? We found the diverse supply chain and our CDW sales team harmonizing, in a really special way that could be meaningful for our customers, community, suppliers.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, when I'm loving the program, I think about, even on growing my business, right? It's, you always need money, right? That's one thing that you'll never not need at some point. But to a certain extent, right, sales can cure a lot of things. But when you think about growing, you think about efficiency, you think about, how to manage money, how to, where to put money, just all these various different things that come along with running and growing a business. That's a lot more than just the money that's coming in, right? And that's, and you think about having coaches and you think about, what's really needed for you to be able to compete at the next level. That is something to where most entrepreneurs, they don't have that guidance, right? To navigate through. It's like, well, I want to do something. I have the passion, so let me go and get it done, right? Versus there's so much more that you just don't know as an entrepreneur as you navigate through. So just listening to the programs that you all have is something that, I haven't, or I would say haven't been privy to see at a lot of other organizations when you think about really how are they trying to help their suppliers versus just trying to squeeze as much as they can out of them, right? To make sure that their cost is low, to make sure that they're able to hit the margins and the things that they have to hit, for the organization. And so let me ask you this then. When you think about the programs that you all are doing and you think about, and you said the team was ready for the challenge and you said they showed it up when they needed to. When you think about for organizations that are going down this journey, right? They either don't have a supply diversity program or their supply diversity program needs a major revamp.
Yeah.
How Can you help just kind of explain or walk us through, like, how does doing this work, the direct value that is adding to the business, right? And we think about the value to the shareholder value in this. You think about innovation. Like, can you make that tie? Because a lot of times when I see many people make cases, right, they're unable to have a convincing case, whether it be to leadership, whether it be to other people in the organization, of why we should be doing this, right? And so, like, what is that kind of case, or what are some of those points that help tie? In order for us to be X, like, we have to do, what is needed when it comes to supplier diversity.
I love this question because when I get asked this a lot in my peer group, right, the supplier diversity leaders all kind of meet and talk,
Yeah.
and we're always, mind sharing when we can. And so I am of the school of, for large organizations, CDW included, like we have to talk about revenue enablement, right?
Okay.
And so if we can, make sure that the supplier diversity programs, whether they most sit in procurement, some sit in finance, DEI, let's not, get caught up on where we sit, but I think the leader is responsible to ensure that it's revenue enabled, and you have to proof that out, like you said, right? You have to make the tie. You can make business cases. Oh, if we do good, be good, right? They will come, kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And so for me, where I land, and when I have the opportunity to work with some of my peers who are, teams of one, maybe in their organization, or small teams, or trying to refresh the program. And one, I just want to say, I love when I get the chance to hear that, oh, we're refreshing the program, because as long as we're on a journey, that's growth, right?
Yep,
It's
it
okay
is.
if the program launched yesterday, right? And you were named to the program, or if you've been doing this 15 years. I think 2020 was one of the greatest equalizers, right? It made everybody pause. So, right, the likes of CDW and some other tech peers that have had these programs for 20 plus years, there's no doubt
Yeah.
all of us had a pause. Earlier, I said there wasn't a lot of pivots, but no doubt 2020 made everybody pause, rethink, peel back what you were going after. What does equitable really mean? What does participation mean? What does utilization mean? And so, whether a program is 15 years, 20 years, 2 weeks old, 1 week old, it's an equalizer.
Yeah.
We're all trying to
Yeah.
understand how we can create economic recovery efforts. And
Mm-hmm.
so when an organization is looking to invest in supplier diversity, right, maybe build out the team or get the new tool, right, for data scrubs. Sometimes it's even organizations, need to know who's diverse and who's not, right? We're not in the business of knowing who carries the certification. I
Yeah.
certainly won't ever make that call, right? Okay, you are women owned, right? That
No one
makes
else should do that either. No one
Yeah,
else should.
exactly. I mean, there's organizations and vendors and companies that do that valid, that's work through that certification, but that costs money too. Those are expensive investments. And so, what I think when I look at revenue enabling, one, it's organizations have always wanted to be where their customers are. And right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are asking customers, or asking their clients, does an equitable supply chain have meaning to you? And, if it's yes or no, I think that'll steer a conversation. But I think no one can negate the spending power of marginalized communities.
Yeah.
Right. I
They
used to
can't.
very often know the spending power for the disability community, right? Because it's my money. That's my family.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I know what
Yeah.
my discretionary income can do to him. But right, the study was just done that, right, the Black community spending power was at 1.6 trillion. I mean, that's a lot of money, right?
It's a lot of
And
money.
so supplier diversity programs, they can connect that to customers, right? When you connect that spending, that discretionary income, connect it to customer base, that equates to revenue.
Mm-hmm.
There's really not a lot of negotiation, right? When you have customers, you have revenue,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Look, you can't. That's it. That's it. And so let me ask you this question, because it's a lot of things are going through my head right now. But when you think through just the products that the communities use, not just Black, Hispanic communities, right? Asian communities. We think about the products and services that they're using, and you think about those companies who make those products, and then how do they show up, right, in those communities, right? It's lopsided, right? It's more people from that community buying than, you can say that we have X amount of Hispanic or Black products on the shelves in our stores, or, or vendors, etc. And so as you were going through 2020 and the organization was shifting, businesses hit hard, and you mentioned this in the beginning around the economic hardship, right, and the impact. When you think about now, you're like the phoenix, right? We've gone through those ashes. Now we're trying to, be new and come through this, right? And so for those organizations that were lucky enough to survive and, continue down the journey, right, of growing their business, or at least getting the right foot of where they were before, how does that change how companies work with them, right? And one of the things that come to mind is, there's been a lot of great programs, SBA, economic disaster loans. You have, other organizations who have stepped up and given grants and things like that. But so when you think about, working with an organization as a supplier, this is one of my, continued, battles that I have to fight today is payment terms, right? We think about how suppliers are paid, and we think about, as I'm navigating through, if my organization is trying to come out of this, pandemic, right, and I go into a situation with a organization, and I'm at the behold of like 90 plus day payment terms, or, in order for me to get paid early, I have to take a steep discount or something like that. It puts me at an even greater disadvantage in some cases, right? And
Absolutely.
so how do organizations need to adjust, to be able to help coming out of this economic downturn, and the with the COVID and everything that's impacting there? What are some of those things that they can do to help business, minority owned businesses, come out of that even stronger? And how do they adjust the way that they do business, right, to be able to help in that process?
We have had so much, really transparent conversation at CDW at making sure, what is our best effort to make sure that our diverse supply chain does not carry an AR too long,
Yeah.
right? And so it just doesn't work. However you want to put the piece into the puzzle, it's not going to work, right? To have a diverse supplier, right, who needs that AR quicker to hold it longer than a CDW or another Fortune 200 organization. And so that has to happen internally, right? Those conversations with supplier diversity leaders, such as myself, have to be able to, get the influence of the finance, the credit team, who's making those decisions, and really laying it out of what it looks like, right? Payment terms, 7
Yep.
days, maximum of 15 days for anyone with a diverse certification. Now, some of it can be in organizations where they don't maybe have their suppliers scrubbed like that,
Yeah.
right? In our very emerging supplier diversity programs, right? They just have all the suppliers maybe in one database or maybe in Excel, right? Whatever it's going to be. So the first thing is, right, we have to flag them and make the financial management system, make sure that they're designated that way, so that then our credit and finance teams, can shift onto the AR. But there has to be deliberate conversation around it and really what's at stake, right? We either can be a
Yeah.
solution, to make sure another 41% don't close, or we're going to let it happen again. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's that's the choice. I don't see
Yeah.
a lot of gray, and those are the conversations that I had, at CDW. We're constantly looking at AR and who's carrying it long, and it certainly shouldn't be the diverse supplier in that chain, right? Because they need that money to keep growing, building, paying. So I'm glad you brought that up. It is something that if organizations are looking to do something, right, whether a call to action was given from stakeholders or a board, what are you doing for DEI? What are you doing for supplier diversity? That pressure, that demand is present. I think the two things supplier diversity leaders can do, right, to get into the win column is one, work on your AR terms, right? That's helpful. That's meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Two, for another cataloged activity is start tracking your tier two report. And so starting a tier two program and analyzing your AR, are the advice or suggestions that I give for emerging supplier diversity programs on their journey to get to some catalog activity, get some wins in this year, right?
Yeah.
For your organization. Because the tier 2 reporting, I think is perhaps, undervalued. The march towards tier 1 is so great and so loud.
Yeah.
Who's tier 1? And we know we have organizations like the $1 Billion Roundtable, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
CDW is part of but if we peel that back too, it's a direct spend of $1 billion. I also think tier 2 spend is just as meaningful.
Yeah.
Right? I think if I, have one of my suppliers and I'm like, okay, whether I pay you or a customer pays you $500,000, the dollar doesn't change from who
Mm-hmm.
hands it to them.
Yeah.
So tier 2 is just as valuable, but there's been this march towards tier 1 for so long that sometimes we count out tier 2. So I'm always encouraging to develop a tier 2 program because that can make economic empowerment. That can create a multiplier effect. Tier 2 can be very powerful if we just kind of talked about it a little more, we were more helpful, and we recognized it.
Mm-hmm. And just so our listeners are understanding here, can you just give a clear definition of tier 1 and tier 2 so they
Yeah,
just know, as they're
yeah.
thinking about that? Yeah.
So when we're talking about, spend,
Mm-hmm.
and it's direct or indirect. So if CDW pays our women-owned supplier, that's direct spend. That's tier 1. So
Yep.
we would get tier 1 credit. I would be able to put that spend in our BDR column when we have to, get to $1 billion. Now, if CDW works with, a supplier, a tech data, right? Not small, not to, and then they pay the women-owned business. That's tier 2 because we didn't directly pay. So you follow the money, direct or indirect, 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And organizations have sometimes built, metrics around just tier 1,
Mm-hmm.
but tier 2 is just as meaningful because there's still inclusion in the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're looking for: inclusion, opportunity to compete.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. And let me ask you this: when it comes to the businesses that you all work with, are there any, especially if let's say large suppliers, do you all do anything around like how they are doing what they're doing around inclusion, around, because a lot of times those suppliers have suppliers, right? And that supply chain down the line, right? So like, how are you looking at those companies, right? Because you can, they're I want to make sure that it doesn't just stop with you all, right? But you're looking at those large suppliers and how they're actually impacting the entire system.
Yeah, it can't stop, one, or this will have all of the learnings, all of the closures, all of it, and the rebuild will have meant nothing if it stops with just
Mm-hmm.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And so absolutely, we're so partner centric, right? Our CDW in the technology space, all of our partners. So there have been today and ongoing conversations of what is your posture and how do we link up? I think some of our best roadmaps are sometimes just in front of us, but perhaps maybe each or whatever it might be prevents us from saying,
Yeah.
can I lean into that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can lean into each other. So, some of CDW's partners, have phenomenal sustainability, supplier diversity programs. We absolutely are meeting with, talking with, of how do we just do it together? We've teamed up with quite a few partners this year. Intel, comes to mind. CDW and Intel was really, really, really stayed focused on the digital divide and equity, and worked really hard to make sure that we were getting as many Chromebooks to as many students in underserved communities as we can.
Yeah.
And so, but there is power in togetherness. But I think, being siloed, we have to just lean in and lift
No,
each other.
I love it. I love it. And so we get close to the end, which I have like 20 more questions in my head right now. And I'm trying to like, flip through and say which ones to ask, Um, so last two questions here. When you think of, how do we take, supply diversity beyond PR, right? And beyond marketing, when we think about the leaders in your organization, right? And I'm just going to think about my business, right? I don't think I've ever actually supplied a supply diversity leader or someone in procurement first, where I always went to a business leader We figured out what it is that they needed. And then I went into, dealt with, procurement and sourcing and things of that nature. And so how are your leaders being held accountable as they're picking people to work with? Like, how do we make sure that everyone across the board has some, type of accountability through this process, knowing that they're picking those suppliers, right? Or they're picking those consultants, or they're picking those, people that are doing their team, or however it may be. And then they're sending them to, procurement to get set up as a vendor and go through that process. But how do you hold those leaders, right, accountable to make sure that they're being aware of what they should be looking for, what they should be doing as they're going through that process?
The easy answer, and I'm never a fan of the easy button, but the easy answer would be, right, what gets measured gets managed. Put it on a scorecard, right? And so, right, we perhaps have, our share of scorecards, but I think in order for all of that to happen, the supplier diversity team, 1, 2, however the team is, my job is to remove those hurdles for the buyers, right? Who's going to make those decisions of that they're vetted, that they have financial, capability, that, it's clean tech for us. So when we matrix out who they're subbing from, who they're doing business with, it all matches, to what we're anchored on and will best serve, our customer. And so we have to have a removal of hurdle process before we're just begging procurement buyers to make a change and do this. And they're really good. It'll save, cost savings here. We're beyond at a time right now today, of what's just cost saving, what's easy button, and how do we get to A to B and not look back. Those days, I think, are behind us.
Yeah.
And so we have to be in the business of removing hurdles for each other, of what would make that hard. How can we make that, a sliver easier for you, right?
Yeah. No, I get it. I love it. And so, actually this. So for those who listen to the call, practitioners, people in the organization that might not have a supply diversity program, but they're looking to do some of these activities and look at these things. Like, what are the 3 actions right now that once they, cut this podcast off, they sit back and they reflect and they say, what can I do tomorrow, right, to at least get me on the right path? What are those 3 things that you think, someone listening should be really focused on so that they can get on the right path moving forward?
Yeah, this is great. And gosh, on the spot, what I would say is, for me, I would say I love things that I can cling on to. 3 A's. So, you get off the podcast, you're like, gosh, I want to get involved. I'm going to participate today, right? And so the 3 A's to me are, what do you want to be accountable for? What are you aware of today, right? And since you know that you're accountable, you're aware, and what are you available to do, right? Because sometimes I think supplier diversity, or I've heard it, right, are combined roles, or a captainship, or a developmental role, and that's okay. But I think to be able to write down or catalog down, what are you going to be for supplier diversity? Is it going to be spend? Is it going to be utilization? Is it going to be that we're going to launch tier 2? Whatever it might be, just pick something and hold yourself accountable for it. Maybe you're going to read 1 article a week on supply chain and equitable circumstance.
Yeah.
Then you're going to make yourself just aware of the environment. I have a story on aware, but I think we're out of time. And then what are you available to give? Because we certainly can't be overstretched more than we are today.
Yeah. No, right? I love it. And that's easy to remember. Accountable, aware, available. Look, that's simple. That's simple. Not gonna make it happen for everybody who's, this has been a great conversation. As you navigate, just to cap it off, when people think about Kristin, right, and they're thinking back and you're looking at your legacy, like, what is it that you want folks to remember you by? If you had to just have one short 25 words or less, if I go ask anybody about you, this is what they was. What's that impact and what's that legacy that you hope to leave?
Oh my gosh, 25 words or less. Obviously, I'm a lover of chatting. And maybe time management is on my, I loved it. But, I think, I know. I can answer this really clearly. 1, I think it's integrity in all that I do, whether I'm working with a friend, a mom, a coach, a softball coach, I'm going to always have integrity. and I'm a giver. There's no doubt, right? Contribute, participate, but then also I forgive too.
Mm.
Have a great ability to forgive and take it as a lesson. And I think just, the last thing is just be really responsible with yourself and others.
Yeah.
I think we have to take care of ourselves and take care of, and whatever that looks like, but don't have it be the opposite of not taking care of each other.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. Look, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, do you have any, parting words, any shout outs? And then where can people find you if they're looking to kind of go and connect with you and, learn more about kind of your thoughts around, this process or other programs?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. I would just say, reach out to me. I am a serial social poster. I think I post every day on all platforms, and I check all my messages, and I love to reply back. And
Yeah.
I would love to exchange stories. And I'm here to learn, here to lead. And so when you can wear all three hats, only good things can happen. And so anyway, excited with so many people and really love today.
No, awesome. Well, look, that does it for us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on another episode of the 3D Podcast. This has been Cedric, and you've been listening to Kristin, Director of Business Diversity at CDW. Thanks, Kristin.
Take care. Bye.